So our next panel will focus on progress and opportunity, updates from the ARB, CEC, and the Air Quality Management District. David Worthington's going to moderate this session and introduce the panel, and I'll get out of the way. Hello, I'm out of the way. And if you don't know David Worthington, he's the fleet manager for the County of Sonoma, and which led all of us in the adoption, a municipal adoption of electric vehicles, so part of an awesome lineage. So glad you're here, and thank you for taking this part of the
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. It's great to see a packed room of people here. Sure.
Sorry.
So I'm happy to fill in for Richard and introduce this next panel. We're starting a little bit late, but I'm sure we'll get through this with everybody's help. So we have at our panel right in front of us, and this is about the progress and opportunity updates from the ARB, CEC, and BACMed. I'll moderate, but most likely won't need to. Heard some great questions this morning. I think we'll have a lot more for this panel. So we have Rainey Chang, and she is the Technology Implementation Officer with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, leading the launch of a new office to scale up technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Technology Implementation Office programs include grant programs and partnerships with electric vehicles and EV infrastructure, as well as a new loan program for industrial facilities and technologies. Prior to joining the Air District, Rainey was the Director of Technology with the United Nations Foundation, overseeing efforts to evaluate, improve, and increase access to energy technologies in developing countries. She is the chairperson of the International Standards Organization Technical Committee 285 for clean cook stoves and clean cooking solutions, which has the highest developing country participation among ISO committees. Rainey has also worked with the U.S. Department of Energy, managing a research program on bioenergy, sustainability to drive technology development towards greater environmental benefits and increased deployment. We have John Goya at the table. He was elected to the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors in 1998 after serving for 10 years as an elected member of the East Bay Municipal Utility District Board of Directors. John is a recognized leader in the Bay Area regional government and on air quality issues. He was appointed by Governor Brown in 2013 to serve on the California Air Resources Board and has been on the Bay Area Air Quality Management District Board since 2006 and was serving as a chair in 2012. He serves on the Bay Area Regional Collaborative Governing Board, which coordinates planning for 4 regional government agencies. He's the vice chair of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority and a member of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. John earned a bachelor's degree in political science and a Juris Doctor from the University of California, Berkeley. He practiced law until his election to the Board of Supervisors. John's public service was inspired by his father, who was a civics and history teacher for 20 years at Kennedy High School in Richmond. John has successfully built coalitions to address issues such as affordable housing, violence, prevention, environmental justice, access to public transportation and quality health care, air and water quality, San Francisco Bay restoration, and expanding after-school and summer activities for youth. We have Retta de Mesa on the panel. She serves as a special advisor to the Commissioner Janae A. Scott at the California Energy Commission, where she focuses on transportation, energy, and climate policy. She provides guidance and oversight for implementation of California's Alternative Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, which provides up to $100 million annually for the development and deployment of alternative fuel and emerging vehicle technologies. She combines technical experience gained from working in the transportation sector for the past 8 years with a policy overlay to ensure program implementation is consistent and will advance California's ambitious climate and clean air initiatives. Prior to her work as a special advisor, Retta worked in the Energy Commission's Research and Development Division, where she served as a staff lead on electric vehicle technologies, and the Energy Commission's Transportation Division, where she focused on production and deployment of low-carbon fuels. Final member of our panel is Kevin Wood. Kevin is a clean transportation specialist at the Center for Sustainable Energy. He manages projects supporting the planning and development of clean alternative fuel vehicles and infrastructure. He leads the fleet portion of the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program, which is California's incentive for light-duty electric vehicles. Through a variety of state and federal programs, Kevin works with a diverse group of public and private stakeholders to expand the infrastructure and increase the use of alternative fuels. Kevin has more than 10 years of extensive experience with local government sustainability initiatives. He holds an MA in urban planning from the University of Southern California and a BA in political science from the University of California, San Diego. Please welcome them with some applause. It's great that we've got some experts on the panel this morning. And we'll give each of them about 4 minutes to bring highlights of what they're working on and help us become educated on the latest and greatest happening in, particularly in California, if not the country. So why don't we start from the right to left? Go ahead.
Who's that?
You.
Yes.
You.
Didn't know which way, which direction.
My right.
With the right and left. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rainey Chang with the Bay Area Air District, and I'm subbing in on behalf of Jack Broadbent, our Air Pollution Control Officer. So I am planning to give a brief overview and introduction to what the Air District does as a whole, and then dive into one of the key priorities for the Air District moving forward. So the Air District was started in 1955 with the mission to protect public health, improve air quality, protect the climate, and then also local communities. So the programs that we have include regulatory authorities over industrial and stationary sources in the Bay Area, monitoring and measurement of air quality and climate emissions, a lot of outreach and communications, including things like the Spare the Air program to encourage more carpooling and public transit use. And then finally, there's an extensive incentives program that over the last few decades has supported millions of dollars in electric vehicles, clean vehicles, bike sharing, bike infrastructure, electric vehicle fleets, electric vehicle infrastructure for charging. There are a couple of shared autonomous vehicle pilots. So I think the three revolutions that Dan talked about this morning are really motivating a lot of where we're driving, especially the communications to educate people and shift behavior, but also provide some funding support to upgrade to cleaner technologies and options for transportation. So can I switch to the next slide? I don't know where the controls are.
They draw on the back.
So the key area of priority is for us around transportation at the Air District is on equity. So if you look at this is an example of trends with electric vehicles, and it's similar trends across other aspects of transportation as well. But there's been a lot of progress on electric vehicles in the Bay Area. We have 20% of California's population, but 40% of EV adoption. And we went from close to zero electric vehicles not too long ago to 100,000 in the Bay Area. And looking ahead, the goals that we have for the region and for the state are fairly ambitious, where the Air District has set a target of getting to 90% of vehicles being electric in the Bay Area by 2050. And the Governor Brown announced earlier this year a goal of 5 million by 2030 or 2035. So the goal and the vision is there, and I think a piece that we really want to focus as a regional agency is on equity, that as these new transportation options are rolling out, that everyone has access to them. So if you look at just the map on the right, on your right side, this is a map of electric vehicle adoption in the Bay Area so far, and the redder the color, the higher the concentration of EVs per population. So what we are aiming to do is really expand the infrastructure and the adoption to be more widespread around the Bay Area. So that ensures that more people have access to the benefits of these technologies for saving time, saving money. And by building out the infrastructure, it also addresses some of the concerns that more mainstream consumers have as well about not having a place running out of charge. So it really addresses making sure people of all incomes can access the technology, but I think it'll help mainstream technology too. So one of the programs that we're really excited to start up, and it's actually in partnership with the Air Resources Board, is a program to provide incentives for the eligible people will be low-income consumers in disadvantaged communities, where they will have the option to turn in an older vehicle and get incentives for cleaner vehicles, including hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles, as well as support for public transit or ride sharing. So the idea is we want to move people out of older, dirtier cars and provide options for cleaner, more efficient transit moving forward. So this is going to be a new program for us, and we're looking for partners to engage and work with regions and governments around the Bay Area, as well as the private sector, to roll out this program, make sure that we can publicize it effectively and make sure that we design the program to be as effective and smooth as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this on. Okay. So 4 minutes to cover a lot. Let me first say, as someone in local government, I want you to know that holding the Bay Area seat on ARB, for me, is about connecting the work at the state, regional, and local level. So I want you to know a lot of the great work is happening in cities to implement state and regional policy, and I want you to know that you can contact me if you have ideas and input on how we develop policies at the state level that are going to really be meaningful. I mean, being in local government for now almost 30 years, I understand our language and the issues we face, and it's important that those issues get reflected at the policies that we're making at the state level. So I want you to know that. How many of you are cities and counties? So most of you. You know, it's really going to be your success, our success together, that's going to essentially be responsible for implementing a lot of what we're seeing at the state and regional level. So I want to give you some practical advice of and how to access some resources from the programs we're approving at the state and regional level. And let me start by saying I think we did something in Contra Costa that helped us. We set up a sustainability officer position, because we had hardworking folks in public works, building, planning, all of the departments working on sustainability issues. But I say this really strongly. We found that having somebody dedicated to sustainability who can work across departments will help all of you. And so we have a great sustainability officer, Jody London, and I think Palo Alto has one. I think San Francisco has one. So the more you can think about that, the more helpful, because some of the funding streams that you're going to want to access are funding streams like in cap and trade. For example, the Low Carbon Transportation Fund, that where the plan is developed by the California Air Resources Board, understanding when the deadlines are, understanding what programs they're funding is important for you, and it's not easy. And then another would be the Affordable Housing Sustainable Community Strategy monies that go through the Strategic Growth Council at the state of California. and that can be, there's very, very good projects that deal with transportation and transit and housing that can get funded out of that. So again, having somebody help coordinate all your efforts is really important. So I'm going to touch on a few things, and I think Kevin's going to probably talk about CVRP things more, right? So I won't talk about those. That's the rebate program, and I just want to highlight there are rebates for public fleets, and you may talk about that because for those of you that have public fleets, it's important to understand that. So a few things. The Air Resources Board uses the low carbon transportation cap and trade funding to basically. We're using that to help cities launch their own ZEV program, car sharing programs, especially in disadvantaged communities. There's a requirement, and many of the programs go beyond this requirement, that a certain percent of cap and trade funds be spent in disadvantaged communities. There's a number identified throughout the Bay Area, including the one I represent in Richmond, where I grew up. So Sacramento is launching a pilot car share program. They're also a Green Cities program under the new Volkswagen settlement. I'll talk about that. So you should look for what they're doing as well, because there's going to be a lot of funding they're going to receive, and I think we're going to see a lot of really good model practices and programs come out of Sacramento. And Los Angeles is launching one this spring, and I'm glad to say in the second round of funding, there are going to be a number of projects here in the Bay Area. And in fact, MTC is going to announce with cap and trade funding from the state, it's going to announce any day now a program that gets 24 zero-emission vehicles and 24 chargers in disadvantaged communities in Oakland, Richmond, and San Jose. So that's coming out. There will be additional rounds of funding, and I know all of you are looking at those types of programs. So one thing I want to sort of emphasize is that electric vehicle infrastructure is going to be really important to the success of this, right? If we're going to reach the goals of selling and having Californians buy zero-emission vehicles, we need more charging infrastructure and more hydrogen fueling stations. There are a number of things happening out there where you don't really have to pay. With the Volkswagen settlement, so the state entered into a settlement with Volkswagen and for their cheating, right? We all heard about their emission cheating scandal. And in fact, that was discovered by engineers at the California Air Resources Board. And they set up a subsidiary called Electrify America that's going to spend $800 million over the next 10 years to increase EV infrastructure throughout the state. In fact, I met with them recently, and they're in the process of putting in about 600 fast chargers in the state of California this year. That's fast chargers. And then there are going to be more level 2s. So, and they're spending their first $200 million investment plan that our AltCar board approved last year puts out about $120 million in ZEV infrastructure, and they're going to be seeking input of local governments. When I met with them, I said you have to do more than just meet with big city mayors. Many of the communities in the Bay Area are, counties that have multiple cities, and so if you can get your county to work together, all the cities to work together in your county with the county to come up with EV readiness plans, that could help in future solicitation rounds for funding from Electrify America for electric vehicle infrastructure. As you know, so many of you may know, PG&E received approval from the Public Utilities Commission to put in chargers. The Air District, Bay Area Quality Management District, is providing grant funding. And then, and I want to talk about this briefly because this is where you can have a lot of control. The new state green building code requires a certain level of EV readiness. I don't think it's enough. There are some cities like San Francisco and Palo Alto that have gone further. In Contra Costa, we passed an ordinance to require more EV infrastructure than the state green building code. The Air District is working on a model ordinance for Bay Area. In fact, Tesla has done a lot of research on practices in cities around the world on this. And so the Bay Area Air Quality Management District should, at some point in the near future, come out with a model ordinance that could be used by cities and counties in the Bay Area to make more robust our building code requirements. Think about it. When you're requiring the best practices and more EV charging infrastructure in new development, right? We're not paying for it from a public standpoint, it's incorporated into the development as it's built. So between all of these opportunities, I think we're going to see a real increase in EV readiness. And Air Resources Board is currently working on a funding plan for our 2018-2019 low carbon transportation fund, and we want to hear from you. So you should, if you go to the ARB website, you can provide information. Again, I want to hear if and you can always direct emails to me at my county email so that I can hear some of the highest priority concerns of local government here in the Bay Area. A lot more. Hopefully, we'll get into more on questions. And I just want to close with with just briefly the 2017 clean air plan vision that the Bay Area, that our board at the local air district adopted last year. It really sets a pretty aggressive vision for how the Bay Area moves toward this new energy economy, electrifying transportation, lowering greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm proud to say, as someone who comes from Richmond, where there are a lot of equity issues, the Air Resources Board is actually now also put $1 million into a program to fund low-interest loans and grants to lower-income residents and lower-income communities in the Bay Area. It's a pilot program to buy cleaner vehicles. We want everyone to have access to cleaner vehicles. Not just quote upper income or middle class folks. We want everybody to have access. So as this program rolls out and is successful, it's going to get expanded more statewide. It's actually being done with a local nonprofit in the Richmond area. And so we're looking for greater opportunities. And Dan's comment, which I just want to amplify, Dan Spurt, my colleague on ARB, that the 3 R's are happening. It's up to us to steer them in the right direction with the right policies so they have benefits to our communities, as opposed to going off in a direction where they will have more harm. And that's really up to all of you, all of us, trying to figure this out. So thanks for being here and learning about all of this and being part of this this partnership.
Thank you, John. Retta?
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Retta DeMesa, and I'm with the California Energy Commission. For those of you who aren't aware, the California Energy Commission is the state's leading energy policy and planning agency. I work for Commissioner Janaea Scott. She's our lead commissioner on transportation, and our office oversees all things transportation-related that occurs at the Energy Commission. One of our primary responsibilities in that role is administering the Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Program, which historically has provided up to $100 million annually to invest in a broad portfolio of alternative fuel and advanced vehicle technologies. So we've done, biofuels, including gasoline and diesel substitutes and renewable gas production projects, natural gas vehicles, advanced medium and heavy duty vehicle demonstrations, electric vehicle infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure. This is actually an exciting year for us. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary of the program, so it's a big milestone. It's also a very interesting year for us. There's been a bit of a refocus of the program, if you will. So as was mentioned earlier in the panel, Governor Brown issued an executive order in January of this year, essentially doubling down on the call for electric vehicles to be in the state. We're up to 5 million by 2030. Our previous goal was 1.5 million by 2025, so it's a pretty significant increase. This executive order was unique in that it also had an infrastructure component to it, which we haven't had in the past. So there's a call for 250,000 electric vehicle charging stations, including 10,000 DC fast chargers. So at the Energy Commission, we're taking a big step forward in helping to get some of that infrastructure out on the ground. Accompanying the executive order, the governor's budget had some additional funding that'll come through our program for deploying EV infrastructure. We generally have put about $20 million into EV infrastructure with our $100 million budget. This year, we're putting $135 million into EV infrastructure, and we're also going to be doing $92 million into hydrogen infrastructure as well. So it's definitely a big change in direction. It happened really quick, so we're trying to figure out how we're going to do that. We're navigating the process, but it's really exciting. we have a ZEV infrastructure workshop planned for May 14th. So we're going to be looking for some input from folks on how we think that funding should be spent. And that's sort of our focus right now, but there are a couple of other programs or projects within the program that I thought might be interesting for this group that I wanted to mention. The first is the CALI VIP, which stands for the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is run out of the Alternative and Renewable Fuel and Vehicle Technology Infrastructure Program. It's a very long name. We got to cut that down. But this is a rebate program that we did a soft launch of in December of 2017. Historically, our funding has gone through competitive solicitations, and we recognize that those can be pretty resource intensive and time consuming for applicants. So we're moving to more of a rebate program. The first project focused on Fresno County, and it made $4 million available for deploying level 2 chargers within Fresno County. It's up to $7,000 per charger. We're planning on doing a full launch of that in April. Our website will be up and running. Actually, we're working with the Center for Sustainable Energy on that. It's a nice complementary pair to the CVRP. And then once that's up and running, we'll be running more projects through that. So right now we're focusing on Fresno County, but we'll be doing other areas. The program affords us some flexibility so we can target, specific geographic regions, or if we want to look for certain applications. So we're also going to be looking for some input on the types of gaps that we could be filling with that. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was the charging challenge. This is a project of Commissioner Scott's that she's very excited about. We launched this one in December of 2017 as well. And the idea behind this is that we recognize that all of the communities in California are unique and have their own needs, and probably know better than we do what their charging needs are going to be. So the idea is that we will give a little bit of funding to communities to do a blueprint or plan to make their community EV ready. And then they can take those plans and come back to us and compete for implementation funding. We did the first round of making the planning funding available, as I mentioned, in December. We should have those awards coming out in the next month or so, and then those folks will put their plans together and come back and compete for the implementation funding. But the idea behind that is also that even if you don't get the implementation funding, you'll have a really strong plan on how to make your community EV ready. And then you could potentially go to Electrify America or other sources and get some funding to help roll that out. So that's something we're pretty excited about. As I mentioned, that's our first project, and we're expecting it'll be successful, and we'll hopefully do some additional subsequent rollout of that in the future. I think those were the few things I wanted to hit on initially, so I'll go ahead and stop there. And
Thank you, Rhoda. And Kevin?
Great. Well, I'm pleased to get to follow up my colleagues from the Air Resources Board and BACMED and the Energy Commission, and as an independent nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the transition to clean vehicles, we've been very pleased to work with all these agencies and others on many of the programs that were mentioned. And I think my kind of number one message of today is, there's a variety of programs that are available to help, move the transition to electric vehicles. But we're at a point in the market now where it's, we're going beyond pilot projects. We've all been doing for the last, dozen years or 10 years, a lot of pilot projects. Let's deploy a couple electric vehicles, a little bit of infrastructure here, and see how it goes. And as was mentioned, with kind of the funding numbers coming out of the Energy Commission and the governor's longer term goals for the number of electric vehicles we have, we need to be thinking beyond the pilot scale and moving towards large scale deployment to really see this revolution, as it was described, come to be. So on the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, I've been pleased over my years at CSE to see it grow from a few dozen rebates a week, which were coming in all in envelopes that I would sit there and open manually, to over 5,000 rebates a month being sold in California. Being issued in California, and that doesn't even reflect all of the vehicles being sold. So just from the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project, we've now rebated over issued over $500 million of rebates for about 225,000 vehicles in the state of California. And as I think was mentioned, the state as a whole has over 300,000 vehicles now. So we've been pleased to see that progress. And one of the big commitments that the state has, as was mentioned earlier, is a focus on equity. So for the past year and a half, we've offered increased incentives to low and moderate income consumers, which we're starting to see more uptake in that sector. And in our outreach efforts, we're really focused on that equity issue and increasing the knowledge of and the uptake of electric vehicles in those communities. And from the fleet side, we ran what we called the Public Fleet Pilot Project. That was an increased incentive for public fleets in disadvantaged communities. And for those of you who manage or work with public fleets, you might know that funding ran out recently. But the good news for today is we are relaunching that program as the CVRP Fleet Program. And we just got a new website updated this week. So we are open for fleet incentives again. All fleets in the state of California are eligible for the standard CVRP rebate. And public fleets located in a disadvantaged community are also still eligible for an increased incentive for being in a disadvantaged community. That's up to 30 rebates per year per fleet. And along with kind of those rebates, we offer some technical assistance for fleets. We want to make sure that fleets are, being smart about their deployment and not just trying to buy vehicles, but one of the requirements of the program is to provide usage data. So we can offer some coaching to fleets that bought the vehicles but don't seem to be putting a lot of miles on them or otherwise using them for the full benefit. And I think that's a big theme as the moving beyond pilots to full-scale implementation is, we need to take all the lessons that we've learned in this state over the last 8 years and really apply them to make sure that our large-scale deployment is kind of as effective as possible. And we, need to be smart about our deployment if we're going to hit all those goals. And as was mentioned on the infrastructure side, we're really pleased to be working with the Energy Commission on the Cali VIP program. That's hopefully going to take a lot of the efficiencies and lessons we learned in CVRP and apply that to infrastructure, because we know that infrastructure is still a huge challenge. And even in the single-family home market, which hasn't been the focus of incentives to date, there's still a lot of work to be done just kind of with single-family homeowners and raising awareness of that vehicles are available and, it's not hard to get infrastructure installed because if we're going to meet those big electric vehicle goals, it can't just be a niche market. It has to be mainstream and everyone needs to know about it. The metaphor I like is thinking about TVs, and at some point people, at first people went out and spent a lot of money and bought a flat screen TV because they wanted the newest, the fanciest TV, where rest of consumers just bought kind of traditional tube TVs. And at some point, that market flipped, not with any government intervention, to where a flat screen TV was clearly superior and available for the same price to the tube TV. And now tube TVs are gone. So I definitely see the electric vehicle market heading in that way. We're not quite at that inflection point yet, but with all the programs that are available and all the effort, both at the state level and all the actions that cities and regional governments are taking, I think we're going to get there to where people stop talking about electric vehicles or zero-emission vehicles, and it's just vehicles, and they all happen to be zero emission. So looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to more good conversation with this panel.
Kevin, thank you. I'm glad to hear that the transition would be from electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, just clean air vehicles. That's all we need to be talking about, and hopefully we get to that transition very soon. So open for questions. Yes, sir.
Thanks for your remarks, and I think the electric vehicle infrastructure is going to be really important, as was stated. I finally shamed my city into putting in a few charging stations. They did get a BackMud grant, but it wasn't a lot, but it
What
helped.
city? What city?
Albany,
Oh, yeah.
City of Albany.
Right.
I'm a city council member. So yeah, as was noted, the Bay Area is ahead of the curve in terms of acquisition of electric vehicles, but we're behind in terms of the infrastructure. So that stuff can't happen fast enough. And I know that my city, after spending its own money, is going to be looking to the county or to the state for more help in that area.
Can I offer a thought? I mean, the biggest gap we're finding is in existing multifamily. And I think that's where a lot of the focus should be.
That makes sense.
Whether you're a renter or own a condo, because a lot of people who live in multifamily often, it's an obstacle if they don't have a place to charge. So looking at strengthening also your own building code. I know there's not a lot of develop. I'm right near Albany. Not a lot of new development going on. So it's really a question of identifying your the public spaces. And I think linking up with other cities in Alameda County to form a countywide EV readiness plan that then when Electrify America goes out, that's going to be one of the largest single sources of funding for EV infrastructure is the Electrify America program. So in their next round of funding for level 2 chargers, you can really start to identify, don't worry yet how you're going to pay for it. Figure out where they need to go. This is just, my advice. Figure out where they should go, and then figure out the puzzle to piece together how you're going to pay for it, whether it's an Air District grant, which is not a lot of money, whether it's Electrify America, whether it's PG&E through their PUC-approved program, or getting developers to pay for them as part of new development. Think about that. Be creative, and I think we'll get there. But start with the plan of where they should go. And I think the other thing is we hear a lot that as battery range gets longer. Like I still have an old Nissan Leaf that's about 80 miles of range. The new ones are 150. The Bolt's 240. People are going to be doing more and more of their charging at home and at work, and so the public charging is still needed. But think about work locations, charging, working with employers in the city to locate more, so people with these longer range will be able to go between work and home and won't need the public charging quite as much as we do with the shorter range vehicles.
On the subject of how to pay for the infrastructure, I think it's clear across the whole panel that everyone recognizes there's a need for infrastructure. There is a lot of funding and an increasing amount of funding. A few years ago at the Air District, it was a few million a year, and now there are several organizations. I think the challenge is going to be with us to coordinate it to make it easy and not confusing for people for where to go, for which category, what's eligible here, what's eligible there. So I think that's going to be a big theme moving forward. It's great to see the commitments of a lot more funding for infrastructure, but we're going to have to make sure it's easy as well.
Great. More questions?
Yeah, hey, Shayna Hirschfield Gold, City of Oakland. Actually, several of you just now touched on what I was going to say. A couple of things. So first of all, multifamily buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems, but it's not new multifamily buildings.
Right. Existing, right.
Exactly. And you, by the way, you mentioned REACH codes. You mentioned Palo Alto and San Francisco. San Francisco did their REACH code in partnership with Oakland.
Right.
So we both promulgated pretty far-reaching REACH
Right.
codes last year. Last year I think it was. In terms of existing multifamily buildings, though, we really need to work on that. I know there's a range of opinions in the room, just from some folks that I know, some of whom say it's just too difficult. We need to be doing high-powered charging stations in areas near multifamily buildings. Yes, I agree. And there are some people who are just never going to charge except for in their own proprietary space, because that's just unfortunately how a lot of us human beings are. I shouldn't say unfortunately. For some people, that's what they need. They need their own space. They need their own charging. They need to know that they can access it a few steps from their door. And we need to put a big focus on that for funding. So this is kind of a plea to all of you. The easier we can make that, in addition to the more plentiful the funds, the easier we can do it if it's just a rebate program until funds run out, for example. Not something that folks
Right.
have to apply for, but just there's funding available if you're a property owner or manager. Send us your plan and we'll give you some money, and it's got to be for the site prep, because as
Right.
I'm sure everybody in the room knows, the site prep is usually at least 3 times the cost of the actual installation of the infrastructure, and often much more in some of these older buildings.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we really need a big focus on that.
If we're going to, in fact, if we're going to address the equity issue, we're going to deal with these existing multifamily, and maybe Dan, you're still here, right? I think maybe a call the next time at ARB, we're sort of approving a program, the sort of the plan from Electrify America is continuing to push them for their relatively large investment to focus on multifamily. They're not doing that in the current plan, but remember, this is a multi-year plan, and I think that would be really important is to, we'll do our part at the state level to push them to do more of this. PG&E said they were going to focus on some of this as part of their plan approved by the PUC that they're rate basing, right? So I think also local government can be creative in working with local large, maybe with the California Apartment Association and homeowners associations. Let's say maybe making it easier for a homeowners association at a condo project, for example, to retrofit and looking at where there may be some funding. I agree. I think that is the biggest gap. Single family homes aren't as much the issue because you can modify there, and new development won't be the issue because of the Green Building Code. It'll be the existing multifamily.
Just a question on that single-family home issue, because I put on solar panels and an electric charging station on my little single-family home in Oakland about 7 years ago, and I thought all the neighbors would love the idea, but nobody else has done it. So
Yeah,
how do you actually
right.
reach all those single-family homes? What
Well,
education is going on?
Right. Well, and frankly, a lot of it's up to the individual homeowner to create a 220 circuit, right, to do a level 2 charging. Pretty much every home has that ability, even one that has 110, to get a 220 circuit and put that in. So maybe in local government, we can help provide funding for lower income families to do that, right? But otherwise provide good information to people as well about what they can do.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, the Center for Sustainable Energy, working with MTC, we did an awareness campaign in the Bay Area a few years ago where we did ride and drives at places like farmers markets and other kind of public events around the Bay Area. And we definitely found that we did kind of pre and post surveys, and a decent portion of the folks coming had never actually sat in an electric car and didn't really understand it. I've seen other, I think it was a UC Davis report that came out recently that, half of people don't even know that electric cars exist, even in California. And so you're right that there's a lot of awareness that needs to go on. I think part of the Electrify America investment is they're supposed to be doing some...
We're spending $20 million in this cycle for ZEV awareness. Yeah.
In awareness. So that's, going to be a huge effect, but at some point the automakers need to step up, and I've heard that mentioned in other discussions is, once we start seeing as many electric vehicle ads on TV as we see conventional vehicle ads, then we'll see some progress.
There's been a lot of effort to try to force the auto dealerships to have more knowledgeable salespeople because point of sale, and I know, Dan, you're doing a study at your institute about this whole point of sale, because, in fact, I heard a pretty shocking disclosure by an auto manufacturer saying, truth be told, most car salespeople know very little about even gasoline engine cars. So knowing that, what often happens is a dealership only will have 1 or 2 salespeople with any knowledge of an electric vehicle. And so when you're at the most important time, when you're making a decision to buy an electric vehicle, you're not getting the best advice. And so I think that's an area we all need to work on. And then the dealerships aren't necessarily owned by the auto manufacturers. So there's that disconnect. So that's an area at ARB that we're trying to spend some time thinking about, is how do we increase the point of sale information where people are actually making the decision of what kind of car to buy.
In addition to awareness, I think to reach more people, we need to think about more creative ways of financing, where electric vehicles, because of the lower maintenance, lower fuel costs, it's going to save people money, but that higher upfront cost is going to be a challenge, especially if you're living, week to week, month to month. So there are ways to kind of flip things around to make things more accessible and more affordable with the financing.
And by the way, the rebates are available if you lease, just so you know. 3-year lease or more, you're eligible for the rebates, just like, and most of these transactions now for electric cars are leases.
So my name is Jose Gallardo. I'm from the city of Concord. So I do have a EV Bolt, and I did take advantage of the lease program. Thank you very much. One of the frustrating things for me is that I drive from Fairfield all the way to Concord, and there is not enough infrastructure. We heard about this over and over. So for me is, what about the idea between the government agencies that own the money actually getting together? Because you guys already know the concentration of carbon monoxide in certain areas. I have looked at many maps, and there's already trends on what can we, low-hanging fruit. And at the same time, some of those communities are also disadvantaged communities that don't have the resources. What about you coming forward and assigning somebody to study opportunities in that community and bring those up
Right.
to the council?
So you're in my county. We're doing that in Contra
Okay.
Costa. You should contact Jody London, our sustainability officer. We have a committee of our board of the Board of Supervisors working on this. Is we want to get all the cities working with the Transportation Authority involved to develop an EV readiness plan in Contra Costa that would identify exactly as you say the locations. Connect in. We want to hear from Concord, and that way we can decide. Where do we prioritize funding? Wherever we get the funding from, let's prioritize where the greatest needs are. And so your involvement will be important. So it's happening. It's just getting kicked off. And hopefully, I think other counties should be doing this. Often when you have one large city, they try to do it alone. But really, you need to do this together. And I think the more we do this regionally and the more we do this countywide, the more effective we'll be. So it's happening there. And I know some of the grant funding and other funding is looking at placing more fast chargers near freeways. If you look at a map of on your app where fast chargers are in Contra Costa, and you look at the I-80 corridor, there are significantly more fast chargers than there were. I see them because I need them myself when I'm driving around. More fast chargers available along the freeway corridors than there were a year or two ago, because either a private business or a public agency has installed them. So I think we're aware those gaps are important along the freeways for fast chargers.
And I just have a little bit more to add. So I used to work for the Auto Club, AAA, in Arizona, and over there we got companies that assisted us to identify areas where a fast charger would be a better bandwidth.
Right.
So I'm recommended for us is actually maybe reaching out to the insurance companies on emergency roadside service, because they do collect the data.
Right.
And that data was used in the AAA to install chargers. And we learned, for example, that most of the breakdowns were around airports and shopping centers, and that we're able to deploy a more effective infrastructure, knowing exactly where the breakdowns were.
How many cities out there knew about the recent round of grant applications from the Air District, from the Bay Area Quality? Okay. So it sounds like we need to continue to even do a better job of getting that information out so that cities apply for those.
Mark, can you raise your hand? So Mark Tang is the one who runs the charge program. So sorry to do this,
Right.
Mark, but yeah.
Yeah.
We've
Hopefully
been
you
really
have
trying
lots of
to
cards.
connect to people who are looking for funding.
And remember, doing these readiness plans will help you when you apply to the Air District, or you apply to Electrify America, or you work with PG&E. Think of these multiple funding sources. It's not just one that's doing it.
And I would add from the Energy Commission, we've done quite a bit of corridor funding in the past. So we've completely filled in the West Coast Electric Highway. So you can now drive from the Oregon border all the way down to Baja. And we've also done quite a few of the east to west corridors. But if there are existing ones that you think need to be filled in, it would be helpful for us to have that information. And also on our Kelly VIP program, as we roll out our website, we're going to do some subsequent phases and add additional features to them. One of the ones that we're looking at doing in a future phase is sort of a crowdsourcing feature where folks, if you're an EV driver and there's a location where you think would be good to have a charger, you can sort of drop a pin and then other folks can sort of like that, and that would give an indication to us and to the EV installers that, this would be a good location to put a charger. So
thanks for all the information. One thing that I feel like I haven't heard is where the energy is coming from, especially with the plan to have 5 million, or I don't remember the numbers, but is it part of the building code that if you're installing new EV chargers that there's a way for that energy to be generated? I mean, the zero emission vehicle factor is at the tailpipe.
Right. That's a really good question. So, one of the elements of the governor's climate change plan is also to increase the supply of renewable energy in California. So as we reach our greater renewable energy goals, all electricity eventually will be cleaner. So you can put solar on your home. That's great, right? And have it solar powered. But remember, one of the strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is to increase the amount of renewable energy that supplies our grid. And so if you think about it, over time, that energy will be cleaner. And so I think that's important and part of the strategy. And so that's really even if you don't think about putting in solar, your energy is going to be cleaner. Or in the Bay Area, where many of us are in, right, community choice aggregate CCAs. I think almost every county in the Bay Area now is covered by a CCA whose goal is more cleaner renewable energy, and you're getting 50% often or more through the CCA. We're at MCE and Contra Costa Marin. Napa has that. East Bay, Alameda setting up its own. So the energy is going to be cleaner.
Hi. This is just a comment more so. Speaking of Electrify America, I thought it was just very interesting to share that they're currently doing their Discover and Drive tour across California.
Right.
And the CVRP has been invited to join them alongside with their public outreach. So we've been joining down in San Diego, LA, and the Central Valley. And I was personally just with them in San Jose and San Francisco this past weekend and week. And I was honestly very discouraged by the lack of genuine advocacy from them, because they're a marketing firm, they're all auto people, and a lot of them aren't really interested in EVs or just doing the gig. There was one guy that was more trained to be the host and going along and inviting people in and doing the tour around the booth. They're heavily promoting their DC fast charger, of course, which, considering the impact on the batteries, isn't really the best to be doing all the time. And I just thought it was just interesting to share with you all the kind of dynamic of their tour, what they're doing.
That's helpful to hear, to put pressure on them,
Good morning. Excellent panel. It's good to see you all there. This is a topic that Retta mentioned, the multifamily building is a particularly thorny issue. I know I worked at the Energy Commission. She's a colleague several years ago. That was a problem then. That is a problem now. I'm wondering, Retta, specifically on the new money that you mentioned for infrastructure. I wasn't aware of it. I try and keep updated, but I wasn't aware of that. Will that incentive be stackable with local incentives as well? It seemed to me that might be very helpful to increase the amount per charger, particularly for the existing multifamily buildings.
Yeah, potentially. We haven't scoped the funding yet. We're still trying to figure out, but we're definitely going to have to do some leveraging and stacking it with other funding sources as an option. So
there's no match? Is it?
Well,
I can talk about the other side.
That's a good question. There will probably be some level of match requirement. I mean, public-private partnership is going to be key to getting us to where we need to go. The $135 million is a really good step forward, but some of our staff analysis shows that we need somewhere in the ballpark of $1 to $3 billion to roll out the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support the vehicles that we anticipate are coming. What that balance between public and private is, we're not quite sure yet, but it's still, it's pretty new. We're figuring it out. We'll see what it looks like, but there will likely be some sort of match requirement.
I was just thinking maybe the local entities could provide that match to the Energy Commission money for
Potentially.
the particular application. So,
Yeah.
good job, everybody. Thank you.
So we have time for one more question, so we're on time for the next panel.
Hi, my name is Denitra Ballman. I'm with the City of Palo Alto. And this is a question I've had, and I've actually presented this in some webinars and such, and I've never had anybody interested in engaging this particular conversation. But so I had a small stint with Toyota, and one of the things that Toyota manufacturing lets everyone know, like when they get the text in the manufacturing plant, is that the Prius, just as an example, has already polluted more than it will ever save just in the battery manufacturing. So before it hits the showroom floor, Toyota has told numerous people that it's already polluted more than the average traditional fueled vehicle that would hit the road during its lifetime. So I'm just curious if there's a bigger picture of, I know in our, California or Bay Area, small bubble, after it's hit the showroom floor, it's definitely doing its part. But are there any studies, is there any analysis going on? And again, even with batteries and, their life expectancy, I mean, we're talking like 6, batteries, these huge battery packs that are, failing even before warranty periods are up and having to be replaced. So, any information on that?
The issue of the life cycle impacts of the vehicle manufacturing, battery manufacturing, where the energy comes from, there are quite a few life cycle analysis studies. A lot of them have come out of DOE-funded national labs as well as universities. And I think that has prompted a lot of work on thinking about not just the manufacturing, but also disposal, recycling of batteries. The vehicle batteries right now for electric vehicles are harder to recycle, but there are companies and researchers looking for ways to repurpose the batteries so that after it's not really a great fit for vehicles, it may still be useful for some smaller scale storage, or improving battery technology to have it be more easy to recycle. So I would say it's a good question, and I think the solutions and the progress, we're still driving towards them.
Yeah, and just say, battery technology has just exponentially improved, and that research on the recycling side is also improving. So I think the goal is that there will be a much higher rate of recycling over time, and that there will clearly be less, quote, battery needed because battery technology is improved. I think the combination, and I don't know this. I'm surprised to hear Toyota say that, because also, and Dan, you deal with the automakers more than anybody probably in this room. So do you want to comment on that? And frankly, I don't. The idea of them not going through warranty period. The rate. The whole maintenance of electric vehicles is much less than internal combustion engines, and the batteries are performing very well. So I'm not. It's probably few and far between that they're failing.
So today's gasoline car, about 10 to 15% of the carbon and energy associated with it, including building as well as using it, about 10 to 15% is in the materials in the vehicle itself. An electric vehicle with the batteries adds about 5% to that, but the actual energy use becomes a lot less. So as a proportion for a battery electric vehicle, it'll be larger, but the total is way, way, way less than for a gasoline vehicle. And that includes the same thing for a Prius. It's just, I don't know where you heard that. That Toyota does not say that, and it's, but it's not.
At least the folks who know something at Toyota don't say that.
Touche, John.
Yeah, I know we're wrapping out of time, but CSE was engaged in a couple different Second Life battery studies, and I think, as was indicated, there's still a substantial value in that battery, even when its range might be diminished in the vehicle, and so I definitely expect it's not going to landfills and leaking toxic chemicals. We're going to be reusing them wherever economical and recycling them to meet the demand for building new and better battery packs as well. So there was also the question about kind of how would the grid handle all these vehicles, and the plug-in electric vehicles work as rolling energy storage potentially while they're on the road, and then can have a second life as stationary energy storage, and that's really going to be essential to meeting the high renewable penetration grid. And so thinking about the embedded emissions of constructing them, they can actually save emissions from the grid as a whole over their lifetime if they're used in kind of vehicle grid integrated methods.
So we've run out of time. Please give the panel a round of applause. They did a great job, very knowledgeable.